Welcome to Her Success Matters, a podcast exploring how advisors can work together to build a pathway for women to succeed in financial services. I am your host, Christine Shaw, Chief Executive Officer of InvestmentNews. This podcast will give you rare insider access to the top financial services executives who are taking action to break down the barriers for the next generation of female advisors. You will also hear from some amazing and inspiring women who have forged their own pathway to success. I'm excited to share with our listeners that we have one of the most influential women in finance joining us today to share her journey as a pioneer in financial services. Our guest for this episode is Rupal Bhansali from Ariel Investments, one of the largest minority-owned money management and mutual fund companies in the U.S. Rupal is a first-generation immigrant who came to America with no network or net worth. Through grit and acumen, she broke the glass ceiling on Wall Street to become the Chief Investment Officer and Portfolio Manager of Ariel Investments' multi-billion-dollar international and global equities portfolio. Rupal is passionate about helping other women pursue a career in finance, become financially literate and independent. And to pay it forward, she wrote a book, Non-Consensus Investing, where she discusses how her passion became her profession. Rupal, I am so thrilled to have you here today. Welcome to Her Success Matters.
Likewise, Christine, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I've learned and read so much about you and some of your amazing journey in the book we just talked about in the intro. So please tell our listeners a little bit more about your personal journey and what got you interested in finance.
Oh, geez, that started at a very young age because unlike kids who grew up on fairy tales, I grew up on stock stories because my dad was a stockbroker and he often talked to his clients from home and I would sort of listen in. Not that I understood much, but I understood that it was something to do about markets. And so that sort of piqued my interest initially. That said, because my dad had a family business in stockbroking, we used to experience a lot of ups and downs. And so my childhood was a roller coaster of how the market fluctuated, our fortunes fluctuated. And I was in a very good school that thankfully my parents had put me into. And it was one of the best private schools. And obviously my classmates were quite well off. And from time to time, I would see them having things. And I would go to my mom and say, I want this or I want that. And her response would be, well, I'll get you that when we have money. And I thought, what is this mysterious thing called money and why don't we have it? So that sort of really got me started in learning more about money and finance from a very young age because I didn't have it.
Yeah, it's interesting, that perspective, though, having a father that's a stockbroker and understanding the ups and downs in the market. What a great background and upbringing to bring you into finance. So share with us a little bit of some of the formative lessons or experience that shaped you early on.
There are so many things that you kind of look back and say, gee, that experience was a tough one, but it made you better for it. I had a really bad experience when I was in school. I was in 4th grade. We had exams coming around the corner. And as usual, we were short of money. And I needed an eraser for school and supplies, and I didn't have an eraser. I was really worried. And it was so bad that, I couldn't get an eraser, right? It doesn't cost that much, but actually back home in India, it cost a lot. And I looked around my classmates and, one of my classmates had 2 erasers. And I thought, gee, what if I just took one? I didn't realize then that was stealing. I just thought, she has 2, I don't have any. I could just take one. For whatever reason, and thank God for it, I don't know, I was a child. I slept on it. I didn't act upon it. And when I woke up the next day, I realized, oh my God, what if someone finds out? And what if my parents find out? And, how will it reflect upon them? And so I didn't do it. It was just coincidence, right? An epiphany. And I'm so happy that I didn't. But then I still had this problem to solve, which is exams around the corner. And again, back then, you gave exams in paper and pencil, just to be clear. And so having an eraser was kind of important because you wanted to get your answers right. And for a week, I struggled and I thought, what am I going to do? And then again, an epiphany struck me that all I had to do was study hard and get the answers right the first time around. And if I did, I wouldn't need an eraser. And that's what I did. But
That's incredible.
the real lesson I learned is, when a door closes on you, it's not about banging on the door. Try opening a window.
That is just so symbolic, though. I mean, think about that. A basic thing and so inexpensive as an eraser. And here you are today as one of the very rare women, females, 1.3% of money managers to solely manage mutual funds in the US. And if you think about that, it was that, okay, I don't have this. I want to do the right thing. So the only thing I can do is study and apply yourself. And it's interesting because I've learned through these stories and experiences that is 90% of what all of us need to do. And it's that grit, the acumen that we talked about in your intro that you learned at a young age and that has helped you in your career. And I'm sure you apply that same tenacity and thoughtfulness to everything you do, which is what has led you here. So talk about throughout your career path. Did you have a specific mentor that helped you shape your career?
Yes and no. I had so many mentors, but from a distance, and nobody that I actually knew. I think many authors were my mentors. People from afar were my mentors. My bosses were my mentors. I just made anybody that I wanted to learn from my mentor. And I think that's sort of the attitude that one needs to bring to the table, because in many, many situations, you're not going to have someone who's going to hold your hand or guide you. You kind of have to find that path for yourself. But there are resources out there. A lot of people have paid it forward by sharing their knowledge, sharing their wisdom. It could be through writing a book. It could be through an interview. It could be just, casual conversation that you're part of. It's really up to you to do the learning and the applying. And that's what I've done all my life.
Yeah, I agree. And that's a lot of what we talk about on the podcast is that sometimes it's not always obvious who a mentor may be, but as females, as people in the industry, by always making it our collective responsibilities to give back and to the people who are having the ask to do the work and be thoughtful about it, I think it helps all of us to move forward. You also had a great role model in your father and was able to learn from that. So that's extremely helpful too. But let's talk about how it is such a small percentage of females specifically in your position. Is there a specific moment or breakthrough throughout the process that really helped you mold and achieve the success you're at today, from the little girl needing the eraser to the chief investment officer at a multi-billion-dollar asset management firm?
There's no one flash of brilliance, that gets you to where you need to be, but there are many milestones along the way. I think the critical milestone for me was in the late 1990s when I was working at a global equity shop, Oppenheimer Capital in New York. I had a very different point of view on the markets compared to my peers. And I felt I was in the minority. I mean, I'm a woman of color, I'm in the minority, but I really felt in the minority back then. I was covering Asian equity markets. I thought they were a mirage when everybody around me were calling them a miracle. Back then, everybody wanted to invest in Asian markets. And I thought there was a gigantic risk bubble, credit bubble forming. And I stayed clear of investing my clients' monies in those markets. And again, because it was a very contrarian move, it was a move that was very out of step with what was going on around me. Obviously, people think that you're wrong and everybody else is right. Yes. So it was a very difficult, challenging period in my time. And to the point where, because my performance was suffering, I had to really, my boss was quite upset with me. Many of my clients were upset with me. And even my colleagues, just could not understand. And I had to explain myself, and I tried to validate my point of view. So it took a lot of pushing and prodding and persuading, but I got there internally. But yet you have to wait for the proof statement from the markets, to agree with your point of view. And that finally came in 1997, when the Thai baht devalued, and Asian markets fell like dominoes, taking the whole world by surprise. But we actually protected our clients' backs, and they didn't lose those big sums of money that many of their other money managers lost them. So that was, I think, a moment when I went from zero to hero inside my organization. And it's all about, doing right by the clients. I think that was a very formative experience and one that was a tough one. Lasted for many years, by the way, because I had that point of view since 1995, and it took 2.5 years for me to be proven right. But here we are.
I know. I love that expression, from zero to hero. But during those moments, that can seem like probably a long, long time while you're waiting for the zero to hero. During that time, did you ever feel pressure because you were a woman, to think like a man, or maybe you were being discredited or your views because you were female, or were you comfortable with being who you were, your authentic self?
I don't think I've ever felt that I need to be like a man or think like a man. I actually think being a woman and thinking like a woman is actually a huge advantage in money
Yes.
management.
Yeah.
I think women tend to be far more balanced. They think about what can go right and what can go wrong. And they think to be much better risk managers, and managing risk is super important in managing returns. So no, I've never felt the need. I think I felt out of place because so many men are in the industry, and I walk into a room, most of the time, 95% plus of the room is full of men. But being out of place is not the same as thinking that you have to be like them.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important distinction, because you can feel maybe out of place because there's not a lot of people who look like you, but that doesn't mean you need to change to conform to fit into that viewpoint. It means really that you have to gain the confidence and be even more assured of your thinking, your opinions, and that you've done the diligence to be in the room and to offer your opinion. And I think sometimes there are women who back off a little bit and who maybe get nervous around that. But like you said, going back to your childhood story, you studied for the test. And if you're in that room, most likely you deserve to be in that room and should feel confident about it. So I think that's wonderful. But let's talk about a different matter when it comes to women. And it's really about juggling work-life balance, especially if you're in financial services, the global markets, particularly, you're working around the clock. You also personally serve on nonprofit boards. And we've learned in this pandemic that it's disproportionately affecting women. So what advice, or how do you do that, can you offer around this issue?
Look, one thing we all realize is, the world is about doing more with less. And the thing that you have the least of is time. So I think a critical attribute that I've tried to be very particular about in managing my life is managing time. And I'm very diligent about it. As my colleagues around the table will tell you, I don't give my email address to anybody. My phone number is not available to anybody. So nobody pings me. I think a source of distraction nowadays, especially, is a lot of interruptions. And I try to steer clear of that. I think so. Time management is critical. But the other big piece of the puzzle is team management. You can't scale yourself unless you have a team of people around you that you have trained and mentored and groomed, and people who are complementary to your own skill sets, so that you can multiply yourself in a very different way and complement yourself. And that's kind of what I've done as well. I'm very blessed. I have a great team of people I work with. So the two secrets of success from that standpoint is time management and team management.
I love that, the two T's of success: time management and team management. And I think there's a lot to be said about both those things that you have brought up. I think earlier in my career, when I was developing as a female in a male-dominated industry, I know a lot of women at first felt they couldn't surround themselves with a good team. It was almost threatening. And I feel like you really need to lean into that, because the more people who bring some smart skills to the table and can help complement what you do, the better. And there is a lot to be said about time management. And I also would throw in there self-care, right? The ability to take care of yourself and make sure that even outside of work, that there's balance there as well. So some great advice there, Rupal. Thank you. So let's talk about personally. Is there a motto or mantra that you live by?
Yes, many, but the most important one, I think, especially for women and for women of color and people of color, is don't get bitter, get better.
Could you repeat that again?
Don't get bitter, get better.
I love that. Don't get bitter, get better. That's a fantastic motto, and it really makes the point, doesn't it? And, I can recall I worked with an executive coach once, and her advice was always replace anger or judgment with empathy, and you can always do better. So things like that are really good things to have in the back of your mind as you're going through life.
So whenever I face a challenge, whether it's, again, scaling myself, as I said, or multiplying myself, managing time, I mean, all of these things are challenges. whether it was a challenge of money. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is, or managing client expectations. I mean, all of these things, you could kind of, whine and complain. Why me? Why? Or you could just say, what is it that you really need to solve for? And instead of getting bitter about what's going on with you or going on for you, just get better. Use it as an opportunity to skew the curve up for yourself. So if my teammates are more demanding of me, my boss, my clients, whoever it is, right? Whatever demands they make on you, if you can rise to the occasion and meet and exceed those demands, guess what? It makes you better. So I now actually, my other mantra is find the most demanding bosses to work for. I think people shy away from that. I seek it out and I am blessed. That is why every boss of mine has been a mentor. And I'm just so grateful, because if they had not stretched me, if they had not made demands of me that I myself at one point thought not possible, I would not be where I am. So I really think stretch goals come as part of the territory. A demanding boss, a demanding work life, a demanding client base, whatever it is, bring it on.
Yeah, I love that, and I'm smiling because I can relate to that. During the formative part of my careers, I worked for a man who was really, really difficult. And on top of being demanding, he was a lawyer by education, by practice. He was the CEO of the company and he owned 6 banks. So he had all the knowledge, all the power, but extremely intelligent. And he just drove us to be our best selves. And I can recall one day coming out of a really difficult meeting with him, and I called our CFO and I said, "What do you think I should do?" And he said, "Put your head down, go back to work and be grateful." And I went, "Oh, that wasn't quite what I was expecting to hear," but I'm like, okay. And a year later, I was like, "That was the best advice you ever gave me. Thank you." So yeah, I love that. We share that.
I think we waste a lot of energy complaining. We just do.
Absolutely.
Or admiring the problem. And I think if we can just get past it and just say, what is it asking of me and how do I solve for it? We'll all be better for it.
There was something interesting I saw that I might get it a little bit wrong factually, but the concept is there. We all have about 84,000 seconds in a day. And usually it takes a person all of 10 seconds to upset you. And we waste many more seconds getting upset about it or working up, complaining, et cetera, rather than just going, okay, let me process that and move on. And how do I solve it? So I think that's, again, it just underscores the point of that, and great advice. So let's talk about women seeking a career in finance. We've been successful as an industry at attracting more women to join us. We still have a long way to go, as you know. What advice do you have for young women specifically seeking a career in finance today?
Well, first of all, this is a question I get asked a lot, and it's a great question to ask. I wrote a special chapter in my book on it, called "A Special Message from Me to You." That chapter, I got permission from my publisher to post it for free on my LinkedIn account. So if anybody wants to read it, it's a very quick read. All my advice to women, especially in this industry, it's out there. And it's also on my website, so people can look it up there, nonconsensusinvesting.com. But the summary, the key takeaways of what I think the best thing women can do for themselves from a career standpoint is actually a very counterintuitive piece of advice, which is make mistakes. Experience is built on the shoulders of mistakes. And if you don't do a lot, you're not going to make a lot of mistakes, and then you won't learn a lot. Men will raise their hand to take on any project, any responsibility, even if they're not qualified for it, even if they might fully muck it up, but they just raise their hand. And that's the advice I would give to women. Raise your hand, take it on, whether you think you're qualified or not. Most of us aren't. When I first started covering Japan, I knew nothing about Japan. I cover 50 countries around the world now. You can bet when I first started covering Philippines or India or, whatever it was that I had to master, the US, it was the first time I was doing it. I didn't know how to do it, but you just take it on. So I would say that raising your hand, taking on more responsibilities, more work, instead of shirking from work, instead of thinking that, oh my God, what am I signing up for? Is remind yourself that yes, you will make mistakes, but failure is not a failing. It's an opportunity for learning. So put yourself out there to make mistakes, to fail, and then recover from them, learn from them. That is my best advice I give to anybody in finance or otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's right. A lot of times we all hold back and wait for something to be perfect, to have every single skill, to have the A in the test, et cetera. But it's like you have to try, you have to have some confidence. And once you get there, you apply yourself and you do your best. And if you make a mistake, you learn from it and you move on. I think that's great. And inevitably, if you're a female in finance, you're going to be surrounded by a lot of men. So let's talk about what advice you give men as allies to women in finance.
Another great question, because you're right. I have the pleasure of having known many men professionally in my career and in my team. And I think that men can play a very important role. I think sometimes they don't know what they can do. It's more ignorance rather than a lack of desire to do things right. One of the first things and most important things a man can do is when you're in a room, when you're having a discussion, a meeting, a conversation, a presentation, whatever it might be, make eye contact with the women, because then you include them in the conversation. And the second most important thing you can do is when you have the opportunity, ask a woman, what do you think? Just those 4 words, what do you think? And that will make a woman speak up, feel more included, make her voice feel heard. And I think it creates a more diverse point of view that gets expressed just by dint of the fact that women do have a different point of view. Those are the 2 biggest things I would say, the simplest things you can start with. I think if you're in a position of power or authority or managerial capacity, give women more visibility and give it to them by giving them more responsibility and more mentoring, so that not only will they do more, even if they don't raise their hand to do it, which we know they're not going to oftentimes, give it to them anyway and build up their confidence. Women need a bit more hand-holding, a bit more nurturing. Once you tell them to do something, they have an innate sense of responsibility and dependability. They will get it done. Even if they didn't think they could get it done, once you give it to them and it's landed on their lap, they will get it done. So I think those are some of the things that I would recommend men do in the context of the office work life.
Thank you for that. And while we're on the topic of gender specifically, so this is still shocking to me. In the 2020 World Economic Forum Gender Gap Report, it still shows that women will not gain equality with men for at least 151 years. How can that be right? And we think we've made so much progress, but that's a real shocking statistic. So what do you think we can do as women in the workplace to help impact change?
That's a great question. And I do feel, and I'm glad you asked it, because I think a lot of times, when we talk about these problems, we think that the woman needs to do something to make things happen. And even when you ask me the question, what can women do? What holds women back? The burden of restoring equality or achieving it is not on women alone. We all have a role to play. And women can do some of the things that I mentioned, and men can do some of the things. But I think a lot of the burden should fall on the workplace itself, because it's an ecosystem. It's an environmental factor almost, where a lot of different pieces of the puzzle need to come to play. And I think that really it starts at the top, but it can also be bottoms up. And I think from a bottoms up perspective, because from the top down, I think there are lots of initiatives, on the back of Black Lives Matter, Asian hate needs to stop. I mean, we hear all this around us. I think corporate CEOs are taking this much more seriously than ever before, and we need to continue that momentum. But I think from a grassroots standpoint, what women can do and what men can do, but especially women, is go to your HR. Just go to your HR and ask the question, I am told that there is equality in the workplace. I am told that there is gender pay parity. Tell me, what studies have you done to demonstrate and validate that that is true in our organization? Ask the HR the question, because everybody says that it is the case, but it can't be, because in aggregate, it is not. So somewhere, somehow it is failing. So ask them to show you proof points. Ask them the question point blank. Am I being paid the same as a man is? Am I being given opportunities? And if I'm not, getting promoted or whatever it is, what do I need to do to get that? So ask the questions. That's my point. Don't be silent.
Yeah, and I love what you said, though, about putting some of the responsibility on corporations, leaders, et cetera. I know myself as a female leader, we have more than 50% female in our workplace. And also, too, like we've learned a lot in this year. And I think that the responsibility too is for companies to continue the ongoing education. I know I've opened my own eyes through these learnings over the past year on all the things that really diversity, equity, and inclusion means, because I think until now, they were words and they were training, but we didn't see the true raw impact on what it did to the people affected by it, really, until a lot of the things that came to light in this past year. And I think that's one of the things with social media. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of mixed feelings out there, but it really highlights a lot of the voices and a lot of what's really going on in the world. So I think that's great advice, and we all need to take our responsibility in that. We know, Rupal, not to tell our listeners to email you, but could you be specific on how to follow you on social media and to follow your readings and the work and the information you have available?
So, a little secret here, I'm an introvert by nature, so I don't put myself out there that much on social media. Besides which, we are in a regulated industry, so it's very hard for us to be communicative to the direct public. But for what it's worth, I try to be active on LinkedIn. If I want to share something, especially knowledge, I have a website called www.knownconsensusinvesting.com, and people can look that up, for updates. Again, I'm not very active, but that's another resource. And there's a trick way to get my email address to that website. So if people are really diligent and smart, they will find out how to reach me. Lastly, I would say, I am on Twitter, but I'm not on Facebook. So that's kind of where people can reach me.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Of course, they can always follow all the great things Ariel Investments are doing and your work as the Chief Investment Officer for Ariel Investments. And so, Rupal, as you know from listening, my final question that I really love to ask guests is, tell me, please, and our listeners, in your words, why you believe her success matters.
That's easy. Women touch more lives. And if you can encourage and empower a woman, it acts as a force multiplier because they touch more lives. And so it's the best investment the human race can make. That's my biggest investment tip.
Right there from the CIO of Ariel Investments, your number one investment tip. I absolutely love it. It truly is fascinating. I do encourage all our listeners to pick up a copy of your book. I did myself. I've been reading through it, and just the beginning chapters where you talk about your father and the ups and downs of the stock market, how it impacted your family, the elevator ride and trying to convince to get that internship. I love hearing that, and being an immigrant too. So it's really inspiring and it's motivating. And the advice you laid out here in this podcast today was exceptional. So thank you very much for your time and your generosity. And I know I will continue to follow the work you do.
Thank you so much for having me, Christine. And thank you for mentioning my book. It is a labor of love. I put my heart and soul into all the content. And you're right, the very first chapter is how I turned my passion into my profession. And the last chapter, again, is a special message from me to you, all women out there who are listening, and the men, as to what you can do to make a difference. So thank you again for having me.
Thank you for listening to Her Success Matters, a podcast brought to you by InvestmentNews, where we believe her success matters. This is just one of our many initiatives that we have to support women in finance. You can follow us on Spotify or Apple, and please rate us or give us your opinion or feedback. And don't forget, if you know an amazing woman whose story needs to be heard, please reach out and let us know. You can find me on LinkedIn at Christine A. Shaw. Thank you.
The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Investment News. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service providers with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.